Back, you should have read through chapter 11. Just like last time, this is going to be a relatively short lesson simply because, well, you'll notice one thing about the Scarlet Letter is the chapters are very short. Yes, there's like 26 of them, but they're very short, and so it's an easy book to read. Up to this point, we kind of forgotten about Chillingworth. Do you remember who Chillingworth was? Chillingworth was Hester's older husband. And he just happened to show up on the exact same day, the exact same time that Hester was being put on public display for shaming. I know it's a big coincidence, but the book was written, 200 years ago. So what I want to do is I want to talk about how in these three chapters, the focus of the novel moves from Hester and Pearl to Dimmesdale and Chillingworth. Dimmesdale is the Reverend. He is the man who stood up on the stage, the scaffold with Hester when she was being shamed in the first chapter, or second chapter. And he is the one that strove with her, implored her, please, you need to tell us who the name of the Father is, because he may be too afraid to come forward, and you don't need to take his sin upon yours. To which Hester replied, if I name him, then that is taking him on me, and that's not what I want to do. He needs to be a big enough man to come forward himself. I'm standing up for what I did. He should as well. So, now we move to Dimmesdale, who is not only the pastor, he's also the father of Pearl. Chillingworth in chapter 4, a long time ago, and I remember a lot of time's gone by since the beginning chapters, Chillingworth told Hester, I'm going to find out who the Father is. I'm going to find out who he is. You won't tell me. I'm going to make it my mission to find out who he is. And that's what he's been doing. Chillingworth has kind of moved into the town, and he's become a doctor, and he's actually become sort of well respected. But he's basically just like moving around from person to person to person, trying to figure out who the Father is. And these chapters basically talk about this kind of odd relationship that Chillingworth has made with Dimmesdale, because Dimmesdale is getting sicker and sicker as time goes by, and he can't sleep. He looks pale. He looks weathered. He's having chest pains, and basically what's happening is that Dimmesdale is developing a broken heart simply because the guilt of what he has done to Hester and not claiming Pearl and breaking these Puritan laws and these moral obligations and religious obligations that he has ruined his heart. And Chillingworth is his doctor and is kind of taking care of him. And one of the chapters is titled The Leech, Leech. A leech, if you're not familiar with it, it's a parasite. It's a bug. Basically, it attaches itself on the outside of your skin, and it's just like a mosquito. It sucks the blood from you. They're calling Chillingworth the Leech because he is basically living off of other people, trying to find out who the Father is, and so on, so on, so on, so. So Chillingworth is starting to suspect through all these long conversations he's having with Dimmesdale, he's actually become like a buddy. He moves in with him. They like live in the same place so Chillingworth can take care of him, and that's what's going on. So we're starting to see Hester is thriving. She's been ridiculed and she's been ostracized, but she's still got her health and she's still got her daughter. Dimmesdale, who's the father, and he is dealing with all this internally, is suffering greatly. Outside, everybody loves Dimmesdale. He's what might be considered a somebody to the outside world. Remember the Emily Dickinson poem just the other day? On the inside, he's torn up. The outside, Hester seems to be struggling. She seems to be a nobody. But on the inside, she's fine. Why? Because she accepted her punishment and she dealt publicly with it. Which one's worse? Public shame, internal guilt. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to read your common lit, your supplemental material. that was about how people deal with coping when something happens, coping mechanisms that people deal with in modern times. So let's read. This is from a study just a few years ago about how people deal with bad things that happen, stress, loss, etc. Work, school, money. These are some of the most common stressors in everyday life. The effects of stress on a person's mental and emotional health may vary, but without the proper tools to cope, stress can have serious consequences. It can manifest itself physically, causing pain and high blood pressure. It's important to learn how to adapt, minimize, or overcome stressful situations, but some coping mechanisms are more advantageous than others. This big fancy word, advantageous, means better. Advantage. All right. So, pardon that was an alarm going off. Basically, look, it's talking about here issues where you let stress harm you. Stress is one of the leading causes of obesity, heart disease, can contribute to cancer, etc. It's a killer. Stress is a killer. Life is stress, pretty much everybody deals with it. Even, super rich people. They have their own stressors. Everyone has their own battle. Just like Hester has stress, and just like Chillingworth and Dimmesdale have stress, they're all dealing with it in different ways. Some of them are suffering, some of them are not. All right, so basically here, this talks about different types of coping mechanisms. All right, so adaptive coping mechanisms. Adaptive coping mechanisms are positive ways people alleviate stress, means lessen. Anticipation is a way to reduce the stress of a difficult challenge by anticipating what it will be like and preparing for how to cope with it. In other words, what are the things that could happen and coming up with ideas of how to deal with that. Seeking support, finding emotional support from others, or asking for help can be an instrumental way of maintaining emotional help during a difficult period. Basically, if you know something's going to happen, talk to somebody. Or if something has happened, talk to somebody. Problem solving. Problem solving focuses on locating the source of the problem and determining solutions or action steps. Basically, you have stress that can be fixed, fix it. Humor. People of all ages and cultures respond to humor. Studies show people who laugh and smile often live longer and develop healthier relationships. Humor is also a common coping mechanism. Y'all, I don't think we all completely appreciate how important laughter is to us. I make my students laugh. I think they learn more and we have a better relationship. And at least in my classroom, school is not a chore. Maladaptive coping mechanisms. These are negative coping mechanisms. This is if somebody has stress. All of these up here were positive. These down here are negative. Maladaptive or negative coping mechanisms, I'm sorry I can't talk tonight, are more effective in the short term than the long term. Usually these strategies may only make stress levels rise in the long run. Denial. Denial is the first refusal, is the refusal to accept the truth or fact, pretending like a problem doesn't exist. Projection. Another maladaptive coping mechanism is a projection. People are said to project their emotions on others when they blame someone else for having an emotion they feel is unacceptable. For example, a husband who feels angry at his wife may accuse her of being the angry one instead of admitting that he is actually the angry one. Disassociation. Disassociation is another maladaptive coping mechanism. It is when a person tries to disconnect from a traumatic or stressful event. In extreme cases, a person who has dissociative behavior may even invent a new imaginary world where they do not have to face an uncomfortable feeling or memory. While dealing with stress is important to prioritize your physical, mental, and social well-being, when you are facing a stressful situation, learn to relax so that you can carefully evaluate how you should respond. It is also important to maintain your mental health. Think positively, exercise frequently, get enough sleep, and don't be afraid to express emotions and ask for help. If You follow these simple strategies, you'll have an easier time responding to the inevitable stress that will face in your life. Easier said than done. It is. That's just basic humanity. It's easy. Oh my goodness, I've been working too much. It's easy to do, to say things, and it's easy for people to give advice. It's more difficult to actually do it. All right. Number 1. Which of the following statements best expresses a central idea of the text? The answer is D. People use different methods to deal with stress, which can produce positive and negative consequences, depending on how one chooses to cope. 2. Part B. The answer is A. People have many different strategies for dealing with stressful situations. Some helpful, some not so helpful. Number 3 is C. What does the word primitive mean as used in paragraph 9? Again, this is how they ask you vocab questions on the ACT and on your EOCs. The answer is C. Instinctive, primitive, instinct. Number 4, the answer is D. Develop in early childhood. And number 5, what is the author's primary purpose? The answer is A. Inform the reader about various adaptive and maladaptive coping mechanisms. All right, there is no big discussion question here. These are just the opinion questions. Have you used any of these coping strategies for your own life? Everyone has. Do you use the beneficial ones? Do you use the negative ones? Probably a little bit of both, I'd imagine. Why do you think stress is such a pervasive part of human life? Life is difficult. Humans make life difficult. Even since the beginning of time, there are a limited number of resources, and people want to take care of themselves. That's their number one priority. No different than coronavirus. There are shortages. People concerned about their own well-being as opposed to others. That's not selfish. That's just basic human survival. Survival instinct is literally the strongest driving force humans have. Number 3, in the context of the article, how do people overcome adversity? That's up to you. All right, let's talk about how this relates to Dimmesdale. So you can see how this article definitely relates to the characters, hopefully, that you've been reading about. How let's just put Chillingworth aside. Let's talk about Hester and let's talk about Dimmesdale. How's Hester dealing with his stress? How's Dimmesdale dealing with his stress? Denial, that was a maladaptive one. Projection, that was a maladaptive one. Dimmesdale is suffering greatly because he is using maladaptive ways to cope with his stress. And it's hurting him emotionally and definitely physically. Okay. You need to read all the way through chapter 19. By the time you come back, we're going to have another poem. We're actually going to delve a little bit, tie Hester and Dimmesdale into Arthurian literature. And I know you may think, what is Arthurian literature? King Arthur, Tristan and Isolde. Extremely famous love story. And if you haven't heard of it, you're going to hear of it. Make sure you read The Common Lip, Tristan and Isolde. It's a poem. It's not that long. We're doing several poems. The reading here is not that difficult. It's going to get a little bit more difficult when we finish the book. I've got something pretty big coming after this book. So read through chapter 19, and I will see you again. Great day to be a warrior.